Hello, everyone. I'm Caruana Gatimu with Microsoft Teams Engineering, and I'm happy to be with you today to talk about collaborating inside and outside of your organization with Microsoft Teams. Myself and my colleagues are going to share with you some of the best practices and guidance around how to do this. So let's hop in. So, for those of you who may be new to Teams, or even some of you who have been around for a while, let's go through a couple of definitions so that we're all on the same page. Now, we know a team is a group of people with a common goal. And now in Microsoft Teams, we have two styles of teams now. We have that discrete group of people coming together to get work done, and we also have org-wide teams that, depending upon the size of your organization, can bring everyone together in one place. Within those teams, we have channels. Channels are a place where you can be organized around a particular topic. Every team has a general channel, but now we also have private channels. Private channels allow a subset of the membership of that team to have a focused conversation amongst themselves. This allows us to make sure that we're not fragmenting conversations. Those of you who are trying to manage your workload in Teams have taught us quite a lot about that, as we're always listening to your feedback on this topic and user voice. So, private channels are a great place to be able to get people to focus a conversation without breaking off into our other favorite place to collaborate, chat. Chats are excellent places to have one-on-one conversations or one-to-many. A little pro tip, you can assign a subject to your chats with a group of people and even pin them over on your left rail. I do that frequently for high priority conversations or decisions that I'm quickly making with a group of people. So this is Teams, channels, and chats. But what we really need to think about is when to best use those things. Standard channels are that open collaboration within the team. And I always talk with folks about the fact that it really drives transparency in the way that we're collaborating with each other. And of course, now with many of us working remotely, that transparency and understanding why decisions are made or sharing documents, sharing information through apps that we're pinning in those channels is very important. So whenever possible, I try to encourage teams to use the channel conversation area rather than breaking everything off into a private chat. Private channels are also, as I mentioned, very useful. Now, in your organization, your IT administrator may have limited your ability to create private channels, but you can have that conversation with them. We do have control over that reporting and auditing. So if you're an IT pro listening to this, which I know many of you are, you're going to want to review some of that documentation on successwithteams.com. So administrators control the kinds of policies involved in both team creation, channel creation, and especially private channels. Now, when you think about this process of collaborating, again, this is about conversation, sharing of documents, and sharing of other types of information as you start to explore the types of apps that you can bring in to your team experience. But it's perfectly acceptable to have some small group collaboration in a chat. That is really what it's designed for, and it works fantastic in your mobile experience. I do this frequently. Back when I used to travel more, being able to answer questions very quickly via chat on my mobile device is a fantastic way to make sure I'm in the know wherever I may be. Now, channels, again, allows that team to have more structure. It can also lend itself to certain business process scenarios. Think about patient care or DevOps scenarios. There's many business scenarios in which you want to assign a topic of information into a channel, and then you're bringing everyone together to have conversation and share information around that topic. Even in Microsoft Teams, we use channels as a way to handle our event management. We have one large team, and those channels are for each event. It really helps people find information and have structure to sometimes the constant flow of information that can happen with Teams. This is an example of a cross-organizational team, and we have some other deep dive guidance that'll be available to you on some of the best practices around the structure of teams and channels. But I want to encourage you to think about bringing people together more broadly. I do see some organizations where you have a lot of little teams about specific individual things, but that can become very difficult when it comes to a manager looking across a portfolio of work. I always recommend bigger teams with defined channels when possible, and using those private channels as shown here for leadership or budget or more sensitive topics. Now, once you're communicating inside of that channel, you can use rich formatting. Chat can be a very engaging and useful way to share information, especially when you use all the tools that Teams has available for you. So once you go in and begin to start that conversation, you can have the menu come up that will allow you to do rich formatting, much like you would inside of an email or a Word document or other types of communication methods. Making sure that you're using that, using things like color, making sure that you're using headings, it really helps people consume the information more easily. Remember, now we're all working online so much that the visual is a very important way to give the brain cues, and it can actually reduce the fatigue that comes with working online for extended periods of time. Now, you can see that you can also embed links, and of course, the almighty at mention. One of the most important things that we do when we're collaborating in these channels is make sure that people are at mentioning you when your information and your attention is required on a particular post. No one expects you to read everything all the time. And that's an important distinction when it comes to collaborating in teams. That's why at mention is so important, as is the formatting that I'm showing you here. You can always attach documents and they come in beautifully. And I highly suggest you do that because rather than emailing around a copy of a document which ultimately gets forked, you can save those documents in the files area of Microsoft Teams and attach them here. That attachment means you're all working on the same document at the same time. And it's powered by our favorite system, SharePoint. SharePoint and OneDrive are both integrated into Teams and provide that file system capability. And so you can rest assured that all of the management capabilities and IT admin controls that you have always configured about file management in your organization are respected in Microsoft Teams. Now, once you've done that and you send that post, you can see that it shows the information very visually. And I'm a big fan of having files attached in this way because it does give you that visual reference as you are going through and seeing the rest of your information as you're scrolling through a given channel. Now, of course, you can also share a channel post to another channel or a chat. You're able to get a link directly to that post. You don't have to copy and paste. You can grab the link and put it in another channel, or you can put it in that private chat. Oftentimes, I will do that when I'm having a conversation about a topic. Maybe I've mentioned my supervisor, but I'd like to draw her attention to it, so I will put a link in the private chat that she and I have together just to make sure that she is seeing it. There's a lot of scenarios in which copying a link to a post is useful. Making sure that you can continue to share across locations, it will format it in this way, and people will be able to get to that information as long as they have access to the team, of course. Now, when you're working together in group chats, it's a little bit different, but very intuitive in the sense that you're pulling people into a conversation and you can continue to share documents and other items within that chat. We're continuing to expand the capabilities of the types of tabs that you can light up in chat and the capabilities that you have. And you're going to see shortly that you're able also to do this not just with people in your own organization, but outside as well. How many of you have email threads or even voicemails with customers? This is a great way to bring them in and have a more dynamic relationship with a customer when you're doing this in chat. Really gives them the opportunity to ask you questions quickly and feel like you're giving them a whole nother level of customer service. So as you continue to do this, you can add additional people to this. You're typing in someone's name or their email address, and you're bringing them directly into that chat. You also have control over how much of that chat people will see. The first time that you add someone to a chat, when it's yourself and you're adding one other person to it, it will start a brand new chat. But once you're there, you will have the opportunity to continue to add people. You can also rename this chat and give it a subject. Adding subjects to your chat is so unbelievably helpful because you're not always going to remember what you were talking to Adele and Patty about, especially if you talk to them frequently. So I definitely encourage you to make sure that you're renaming those chats so that it gives you some information about that subject. Now, what if you want to communicate and collaborate with a broader group of people? Well, that's what announcements are for. The announcement post type is very impactful. You have the opportunity to cross-post it across teams and to format headers. This, again, it gives a visual distinction to the information. Uh, Never underestimate the visual when it comes to the chats and collaboration that you're doing. You're starting a new conversation within the client and you're selecting an announcement type. As you select that announcement type, you'll see the header come up, and that's where you have an opportunity to configure it. You can put an image behind it, you can change the color. There's a lot that you can do in terms of formatting that header. It's very, very helpful, and I use this all the time when I'm doing announcements about events, virtual events. Maybe I'm publishing some new content, things of that nature. We have lots of announcements, of course, internally across teams about this very event here. So using announcement types and especially being able to select the different types of teams and channels that you want to post that to is very helpful. Now, the commentary and the collaboration that happens will happen in the individual teams that you were selecting. So when someone answers you and makes additional comment or maybe tags another person about your announcement, it's going to show up in that team and in that channel. So when I do cross-post across multiple teams, I make a habit to go back and just check the comments to see if there's anything that I need to follow up on. Sharing posts and announcements across the team is also then very obvious because you have this special little icon here next to the time that you posted, and you can always click on that to see or edit where you have sent this post. Reaction icons continue to keep people engaged, and we've heard your feedback about expanding them. So we're continuing to really look at the way that we can make sure that people can give the right kinds of reactions. By clicking on the ellipses menu there, you're able to see the kinds that are available, and never underestimate the power of a like or a heart on a post, especially if you're a leader in your organization. People notice, people care. And so it's a quick and easy way to let people know that you're paying attention to the information that they've sharing, and you're just acknowledging it very quickly. Again, a very simple and easy thing to do, especially from your mobile device. Now, as you get used to working in chat, many of you have probably been working in Outlook for a long time and will continue to. And some of you even have rules and other ways that you're used to managing the information flow in Outlook and in other systems that you work in. One of the things that you will adjust to as you work in teams is learning to quickly scan channels to find what's new and important. We're continuing to invest in this area as well with new features that will be coming out over the coming months. It's important that you can see where the unread replies are as you scan through a channel. You're also able to see if posts have been marked important, and an icon indicates if you were mentioned by name in a particular post or reply. This is also the beauty of the activity feed. And there's a special session on managing your workload using the activity feed that we'll share with you in additional resources. But at the very least, the teams that you were in, that you're collaborating in, you're able to take a look very quickly and see what's happening and where your attention is needed. Just to summarize, make sure that you think about these best practices as you bring your teams together. We know that working in this way is a little bit different for some of you, and many of you didn't have the opportunity of a long runway before you started using Microsoft Teams. So, as you continue to use it, it's important to embrace some of these best practices. Use those private channels to provide focused areas for sensitive conversations. Do as much of your collaborating inside of a team and in channels as possible. Leave a chat for a person as you would a note on their desk or a voicemail. Depending on the culture of your organization, you might want to avoid just posting a question mark or just a hi without the balance of your message. People have a tendency to come and triage chats in the time that they have during the day. And so if you leave your question, they can answer you. Not every chat has to be in synchronicity with another. Asynchronous communication is a good thing. Use that rich formatting to create impact and structure in your chats and set message priorities to draw people's attention to urgent items. Make sure that you have the Teams mobile app installed on your mobile device so that you can stay connected from wherever you are. But above all, remember, this is human communication. Anytime you can use images and other ways to make it personal within the appropriateness of your own company culture, of course, is helpful. And it really does reduce fatigue and help us to stay connected during these times when many of us are working remotely. Now, you heard me mention earlier the scenario of collaborating outside of your organization, and this is critical right now. Many of us work with partners and customers or people who are adjacent to our organization to deliver our business value. And Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365 as a whole is built specifically for that. Now, you can take a look here at these different organizations. So we have Contoso, we have Fabricam, which has Azure Active Directory, and we have a non-Azure Active Directory organization. We're able to communicate in different ways with people from all of these organizations through external access and federation. There are some limitations, and of course, as always, we have detailed technical guidance on our Success with Teams site at docs.microsoft.com. So we encourage you to take a look at that and dive into the additional resource links that we've provided. But there's another way also that you're able to collaborate with people from outside your organization, and of course, it's referred to as guest access. Many of you have used guest access over the time, ever since Teams was launched, and we continue to improve and invest in that experience. All right, so let's talk about external access. You may also know it as federation. External access is a way for Teams users from an entirely external domain to find, call, chat, and set up meetings with you in Teams. Now, of course, you're totally in charge of this. If you are the IT administrator for your organization, you have control over who can do this and when. But you can use external access to communicate with external users who are also still using Skype for Business, both online and on-premise, as well as Skype. There's some capabilities that are available in external federation: search, chat, calling, meeting, and profile information. And so as you can see on the slide here, each one of these has different capabilities, and there are some limitations. But overall, your ability to share documents, have meetings, do calls, and see certain profile information, depending upon how your IT administrator has configured it, is available to you. So I want to step back from the technology for a second and put this in business terms. Think about what this could mean to the way you work with your customers. Think about what this could mean to the way that you work with different suppliers who may be helping you to deliver your business value. Making sure that you have a way that's simple and easy for people to reach you is critical today and can be a differentiator as we investigate scenarios like touchless service and curbside delivery and all of the other things that we are dealing with in our current situation. The truth is, the current worldwide situation is allowing us to embrace technology that we were intended to embrace at a later time, but we've had to do it at a more rapid pace. So if you haven't investigated how this can change your relationship with customers and partners, now's the time. You can start by searching and finding users outside your organization. The best way to do that is to type the email of a user outside into the search box and allow it to search. If both of you are in Teams and in coexistence mode, you'll be able to find that person and communicate them via this person's Microsoft Teams native federation. If either you or the person outside of your organization you're trying to reach are not set up as Teams only, you will be able to communicate with this person via Skype for Business Interop. Now, when the person you're trying to reach is a Skype consumer user rather than an AAD user, when you search, you will find a way to communicate with this person via Skype Interop. So, in many cases, you don't, as an end user, have to think about it so much. But if you're an IT professional supporting the system, it's important to know the distinction, especially as you train your help desk users on any questions that they may have as they're trying to set up communication and collaboration. Teams Native Federation is available, and messages and calls will be sent to that external person's Teams app. So if I try to call Sally at Fabricam, it's going to go directly to her Teams app because she's an Azure Active Directory company, and we've got that native federation with each other. It supports rich text messages with all the media and emojis and app mentions that we've become accustomed to working inside of Teams. It has support for all the various message actions, including deleting and editing messages, and soon there will be support for adding external users to group chat. And this will really be important when you think about that customer engagement scenario. Now, there are different types of federation, and now this one we're focusing on is Skype for Business Interop Federation. Messages and calls will be sent to the external user's Skype for Business app. So if I try to call someone at another organization, then it would go directly to that Skype for Business app if this is the kind of federation that we're using. It only allows me to have plain text chat with that person, and no message actions are supported. Now, Skype Interop Federation is a little bit different. So, messages and calls are sent to that user's Skype consumer app. It is again plain text, and there aren't any message actions, and there aren't any message actions. But Teams users can initiate the chat or the call. Skype users accept, but they can also initiate conversations and calls back to that Teams users. There's an option to block specific Skype users from Teams. So there's lots of ways that you can connect between these different systems to really drive that collaboration so that you can get work done. So you should be using Federation, and I hope you will be after this session. Use external assets when you have different domains within your organization. Many global companies have this to be the case. Maybe the domain represents a region or different companies that have come together under the same umbrella. You want to collaborate with people who are in domains outside of your organization, and you want to support open collaboration. You want anyone else in the world who uses Teams to be able to find and contact people in your organization or in a subset of the groups within your organization. You also may have Skype for Business users or non-AAD users that you also want to collaborate with. We have some very clear scenarios when you should use Federation. And again, there's lots of documentation available about the configuration of it, both on docs.microsoft.com and in our Microsoft Learn content catalog. Setting up external access is relatively straightforward. You will need to be an IT admin to be able to get to the Teams Admin Center and the Azure Active Directory Admin Center to be able to do that work. So make sure that you have the appropriate rights, and then you can select the right options for the scenarios that you want to enable. You are in charge of how this works. So if you haven't gone and taken a look at these setups, these settings already, I highly suggest that you do that. Having secure remote collaboration that is flexible and easy is really what Microsoft Teams is about. So you want to make sure that you define that list of domains once you're there in the admin center. Define that list of domains that are allowed or blocked from communicating with users in your organization. In many places, the IT admins, especially in larger companies, actually take service requests to make these changes as the needs of the business change depending upon the types of companies that they're collaborating with. As with any technology, there's some limitations. We've got them listed here for you so you can see them. Adding external users to teams and channels is not supported, nor is today them being added to group chats, but that is something that's coming soon along with file sharing. Apps and tabs aren't supported in federated chat, and normally you will not see the user's profile picture or status message. I always find that kind of a handy way just to glance and see if that's an external user, because if they don't have a profile picture, I know that they're probably coming from outside my organization. You can block individual external users that are part of a different organization as well. Again, many of these things are under your control. Some of these are actual limitations of the capability, but having that secure collaboration by using external access is a great way to move forward. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Somak, and he's going to talk with you about guest access. But I hope I've left you with some information to make you think about how you really want to collaborate using Teams. You're not limited to collaborating with just the people in your organization, and chat and channels are a powerful way to get work done. So with that, I'll turn it over. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Somak, and I'm here to talk to you today about collaboration using guest access, which is another form of external collaboration that you can use in Teams to collaborate with people both inside and outside your company. I am a senior program manager working in Microsoft Teams in the identity space. I generally work with things in enterprise, collaboration, accounts, identity story, and obviously including guest access, which is what I'm here to talk to you about. Jumping right in, so let's talk about what is guest access really. So guest access is a technology that we have built inside of Teams, which is actually built on top of Azure business-to-business collaboration, or Azure B2B, which essentially gives your employees an opportunity to work with people who happen to be outside your organization, but needs to be involved in a project or some sort of event, it gives your employees a way, as well as your IT admins a way, to include those people who happen to reside outside your organizational boundary into your rich collaboration space. So you can bring them into teams, you can bring them into channels, you can share apps with them, you can share line of business applications, you can share other office applications. So all of those will actually be available to a guest who comes into the company. The other way that we see that our customers use this B2B or guest access in Teams is that for bigger companies or bigger organizations who have what we call Azure tenants distributed across the globe. So, for example, your Contoso, you have a tenant in the United States, you have a tenant in Europe, you have a tenant in India, China, Japan. These are all the same companies, but you have chosen to set up your tenants in these different geographic locations for whatever business reasons that you have. Today, the Teams experience is hard bound to the organization that your employee is part of, so the tenant that the employee is actually part of. But what if this employee wants to talk to someone who is on a different tenant, but in your company? So guest access is another way in which you can do this kind of complex organizational setups where you can say, hey, essentially this employee does not belong to this tenant. I'm going to bring him or her in, and I'm going to make them either a guest or a member. So guest access in Teams allows you to do all of this kind of collaboration scenarios. So who can be guests? It is literally anyone in the world who has an email. So it can be a consumer email, like your Outlook, your Gmail, your Yahoos, your Comcasts, and so on. So it can be any consumer email. It can also be a business email. So by business email, I mean that it can be an Azure AD organization or any other organization in the world. So essentially, as long as there is an email attached to the cloud, that person can actually be invited into the Teams collaboration space and given that rich Teams, channels, apps, experience that your employees are generally used to. So if this feels like this is kind of like getting people from outside your organization and giving them control, the great thing about guest access is that the owner of the teams that are bringing in guests, as well as your IT, has full control of how these guests have the collaboration experience inside Teams. There are some restrictions that Teams provides by default. So there are some things that guests can do, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. There's some things that guests can do, there's some things that guests cannot do, and there are some things that you can, as an IT or a team owner, give permission to the guests so that they are able to do those kind of collaborative actions. This is not only in Teams. Again, this is something that is available across the entire Azure and Office 365 suite. So there are a whole bunch of controls that you can actually use to both fine-tune as well as control, restrict the experience of the guests who come into your tenant. Down below, I have actually linked there if you want to go and read up a little bit more about what Azure B2B is and what the capabilities it provides. Today we'll talk about Teams, but again, like Azure B2B is something that is available to all O365 customers, and you should be able to learn and read more about it on that link that I've given below. So one of the beautiful things about guest access in Teams is that it's fully integrated with Azure and Office 365. What do I mean when I say that? So guest access, if you think about it, is just a projection of the B2B capabilities that Office and Azure provides to every single application. Doesn't have to be your O365 applications only. It can be a line of business application that uses Azure AD as your directory strategy. The identity and access management is completely controlled by Azure. And what Teams or any other Office application does is it essentially enables a projection and an interpretation of that experience inside the Teams application itself or their respective applications. What does that mean? So one of the first benefits that you would see as a user is that you have seamless access. So traditionally, if you wanted to bring someone in from an outside company, you would essentially give them some sort of a vendor identity, like a V- is what we call in Microsoft, or however you might interpret that in your company. So you would have to give these users an account, so username, password, any other credentials. These users would have to know and maintain it, and you would have to maintain the entire life cycle of that account. The great thing about Azure B2B is that guest users can bring their own identities. Like they have a Gmail account, that's okay. They can just bring in their Gmail account and sign in as a guest. If they have an Azure, excellent. If they have a Microsoft account, excellent. If they have none of the accounts, then we will take care to make sure that you can invite any email in the world, and we give them, when I say we mean Microsoft and Teams, we give them a complete account experience where they sign in and they can access guest access. They can access as a guest. All of those are controlled by the product. You don't have to worry about any of this lifecycle management. Like I mentioned before, this also means since it's any email in the world, your partner does not have to be an Azure AD. The reality of the world is likely that you are working with partners who have a mix. You might be working with some smaller organizations who are not even on Azure or using some other cloud suites, and there can be some individuals who might just be using their personal email. All of those emails and account types is actually supported in guest access, and we would upgrade them into an account that is supported. All of them seamlessly, the user would just have to get an invitation, and as part of the what we call the redemption flow of the invitation, which is basically, hey, I got invited to an organization, I'm going to accept that invitation, we take care of that. Guest access is also free. So we basically give 5 guests for every 1 license. What does that mean is that, let's say, just for an example, if you have a P1 license, then you can actually bring in 5 guests and give them P1 capabilities. If you have some other license types, then you can actually bring in 5 guests for those license types. And that will not add to your already the licenses that you would have already assigned for your employees. Moving to the second bucket of greatness, with every single Microsoft product, even a guest access is we always built it secure by default, which would mean that we are putting checks and balances in place. But as an organization, you also have a lot of sophisticated technologies that you can use. You can use enterprise-grade data security that you use in your organization and enforce that. You can use scripting to control guests. All the settings in guests can be scripted. You can also use classifications to kind of like lock down more than what Teams or Azure provides by default. So you have a lot of flexibility. So you have a basic, highly secure way in which you can bring external users, and then you can build on top of that, or you can reduce if you want to give more collaboration experiences. You can also reduce the restrictions you put in place. It is completely under your control. The last powerful bucket is that because it is fully integrated into Azure as well as Office 365, which would mean that all of the tools, the management tools like auditing, tracing, access reviews, all of them are actually available for your organization to use. You can use things like conditional access. You can say, hey, if you're an external user, I want you to always do second factor. You could also choose something like one-time passcode, which is like if you're an external user, every time they want to sign in, we will send them a one-time code that will be valid for 24 hours. And that is the lifetime of the management experience with that particular user. After 24 hours, if you want, they can renew their contract with your company we'll send them one more code and they can use that code, or you can just revoke their permission. You have the ability to allow or block entire domains. For example, you are a highly secure organization and you only want to collaborate with, let's say, 10 organizations on the planet. You can just collaborate with them. Or you could say that, hey, I have a competitor and you do not want guests to be coming in from that competitor. You can also block that competitor domain. So similarly, every tool that Azure has to provide are actually available as part of guest access in Teams. Down below, I've also given a link where you can go and read more about how you can control, fine-tune all the different access policies in Teams, as well as other O365 apps. So how does this entire thing work? So the way it works is that as a Contoso, in this example, I'm using Contoso as an organization or a tenant, one of its employees or its IT organization decides that they want to bring Joe at Fabricam.com to a team called marketing team. I'm just using Fabricam.com as an example, but like I said, it can be any email in the world. When this invitation goes out, Teams internally does a whole bunch of stuff, but essentially it utilizes the Azure B2B connection experience, and it creates a footprint of Joe inside the Contoso tenant. The moment it is created, it becomes managed in a directory. So you can start applying policies, putting him in some groups. You can essentially do whatever directory, you can essentially use whatever directory tools that you want to use at that point in time. But this does not mean that the user actually has access. So Joe doesn't have access to your company just yet. He would receive an email. Or if he's already on Teams, he'll receive a notifications instead of Teams, which will tell him that, hey, someone in Contoso, this person has actually invited you to a team called Marketing Team. Joe would have to explicitly click on that invitation link, and we will do what we call a redemption experience, where we would make sure that Joe consents that Contoso will have access to some of his details, like user information, maybe some logs. Once he agrees that, yep, I consent to this experience, we will actually hydrate his entire user experience inside of Teams, inside of other Office apps, across your directory. So invitation, connection, and redemption. That's essentially the three big pieces of this entire puzzle. There are some settings that you would have to check. So some of the things are enabled by default. Some of the other settings you could change, you could enable. Down below, I've given a link where you can go and read up around, hey, what are the different things that you need to do or you can change to essentially enable this entire invitation, connection, redemption experience. So now the guest has come in. So let's talk a little bit about what they cannot do, and what they could do if they were given some additional permission. So by default, the whole promise of guest access is that the guest is just another partner who happens to reside outside your organizational boundaries. So which means by default, a guests come in, their visibility is restricted only within the team that they're part of, and you can lock it down even further. And I have got some links in the previous slides where you could actually go and read up how you can lock it down even further. But by default, they will only come into that team. They can only communicate with other users that they share the team with. They can talk to them, they can have channel conversations, they can do one-on-one chats, they can post messages, delete, edit messages. They can also share a file as part of the channel. So they cannot do a one-on-one file share, but they can share a file through the channel. Your employees, however, can do one-on-one file shares, and any enterprise policies that you apply on that file will continue to apply. Let's talk about what guests cannot do. Now, this is what we have enabled as a product experience by default. So we essentially say that, hey, if you bring in someone and mark him or her as a guest, you can actually not create teams, not create meetings. So we restrict their control. They cannot discover and join public teams, not use apps, bots, and connectors, and stuff like that. The other thing that you should be aware of is that in Azure B2B, there are some restrictions at a platform level. So for example, OneDrive for Business is actually not available for guests. So any of OneDrive for Business functionalities, like for example, attaching a file to a one-on-one chat, is actually not available for guests. This is only if you are bringing in someone as a guest. Like I said before, you can also bring in someone as a member, and most of these restrictions, except for platform level restrictions like OneDrive for Business, most of the Teams level restrictions actually go away if you bring them in as a member. Then there's a middle ground where, as a team owner, you can get some additional permissions. For example, you can say, hey, you're a guest, that's fine, but I trust you. You can actually create a channel for a project for communication. You can also allow your guests that, hey, you hired someone in or you brought someone in, but that person in turn can bring more of their colleagues into the same team and channel experience. So you can also enable that for the guests in your team. I have also linked here around what the experience looks like. So that shows you a little bit of visuals and pixels around like, hey, what are the different things the guests can do, cannot do. It goes even into deeper details like, can the guests make a call? Can they do VoIP calls? Can they do PSTN calls? What is their meeting experience and stuff like that. That is all I had to share today. Thank you so much for listening to me. And we are always here. Reach out to us through user voice, through any of your official channels. And I'm happy to answer any questions, provide any more clarifications you need. Thank you so much, and have a great time in Ignite.